3 bones and a shred of cloth, and yet the revelation of a sad fate. One of 8,000 victims of the Srebrenica genocide is recovered here from a mass grave in eastern Bosnia. The bones are later brought together.
Right here.
Catherine Baumberger is the Director General of the International Commission on Missing Persons. She has been instrumental in finding and identifying the bodies of the disappeared. She cannot put the Srebrenica genocide behind her.
Yeah, in many ways, every day is 1995. We are eternally dealing with this issue now 20 years later.
Baumberger moved to The Hague from the Bosnian capital Sarajevo a few years ago. And this state-of-the-art lab where DNA is extracted from skeletal samples and analyzed came with her. The genetic codes can then be compared with the DNA of survivors. But this is not only about victims finding closure.
Not only that the bodies were found and allowing families to bury them, and in our case, using DNA to accurately identify them, but also ensuring justice for the victims. And that's been a road that we've embarked upon, but is not over yet.
The lab results have been used in various trials. In 2017, the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia found the main perpetrator of the Srebrenica massacre, the former Serbian military commander Ratko Mladic, guilty of committing war crimes and genocide. He was sentenced to life in prison. On July 11, 1995, Mladic and his troops overran and occupied Srebrenica, where tens of thousands of Bosnian Muslims had sought safety. This is rarely shown footage from the Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. A Dutch battalion of UN Blue Helmets was supposed to defend the UN safe haven. But many soldiers looked on as Mladic had the men and boys rounded up. They were taken away and murdered in mass shootings, over 8,000. But there was more horror to come.
I mean, the perpetrators went back to the original mass grave sites, and to cover up the evidence, they used heavy machinery. They went back to the original sites and dug up bodies from primary locations and moved them to multiple secondary locations, often 50 kilometers away from each other.
The U.S. detected the genocide by analyzing satellite images. Victims had been buried across Serbian-controlled eastern Bosnia. Some skeletons were torn apart. Then, years later, under the eyes of the Bosnian Serb authorities, the dead were exhumed.
So this went back to the forensic pathologist, who would then look at cause and manner of death, which was often difficult because heads would be missing. I mean, it wasn't always possible to see bullet wounds because often they were executed in the head if the head is missing. I mean, I'm getting into the gory details. But this required probably the most meticulous scientific effort ever conducted in a post-conflict situation, and specifically related to a genocide.
The aim is to allow family members to properly bury their deceased loved ones. Anthropologists are piecing together their human remains.
Because it's possible that this came from one individual and this came from a different individual.
A daunting task. Today, experts can rely on DNA analysis that make their work easier. Samples are extracted from the human remains, sometimes from a whole range of them. This has allowed the experts to more or less piece together skeletons of the deceased. By comparing these DNA samples with those of relatives, the once nameless victims regain their identity.
But that meant working with traumatized families of the missing to try to receive DNA samples from them and to match those samples to the post-mortem skeletal remains that were being found in mass graves.
What began in Srebrenica is now a widespread method for identifying victims. It's used the world over to identify those killed in wars and other conflicts.
And Srebrenica is a reminder of what we're all capable of, regardless of which country we're from. That level of hatred results. It can have a very, very bad ending, and I am scared.
Catherine Baumberger says it's up to us alone whether or not we learn from the past.